She walked into that lodge, carrying everything she owned in one canvas bag. 26 years old, one arm, one crutch, and a past heavy enough to crush concrete. Every single person in that room looked at her, then looked away. Every chair was suddenly taken. Every table was suddenly full, except one, and the man sitting at that table had no idea that pulling out an empty chair would crack open a secret, buried 14 years deep, a secret that connected him to a dead man he'd never stop thinking about. This is where it starts. If this kind of story hits you in the chest, subscribe right now. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Don't go anywhere, because what happens next changes everything. The storm came down from the ridge the way bad news always does, without warning and without apology. By 4:30 in the afternoon, the sky above Ashford, Pennsylvania, had gone the color of old pewter. Gray, exactly. Not gray like color of something that had already decided what it was going to do and wasn't interested in your opinion about it. The temperature had dropped 11 degrees in 2 hours. The forecast called for freezing rain transitioning to sleet, sleet transitioning to something the Weather Service politely called significant accumulation, which anyone who'd grown up in these mountains knew meant stay inside, stay put, and pray your roof holds. Route 6 through the gap what was already sheeting over. The two-lane road that connected Ashford to anything resembling civilization twisted through 8 miles of switchbacks before it descended back toward the valley. By nightfall, it would be impassable. Everyone who'd made it to Pine Hollow Lodge before the storm closed in knew they weren't leaving until morning at the earliest. Maybe longer. Pine Hollow sat on a wide gravel lot at the edge of the ridge, the kind of roadside lodge that had been old when the guests' parents were young. The sign out front still had all its letters, but the second L in Hollow flickered every 30 seconds, like it was asking a question. The main building was timber-framed and low, with a covered porch wrapped around 3 sides, and a great room inside that smelled permanently of pine sap, wood smoke, and decades of fried food. 8 guest rooms occupied the east wing. The dining area in the main room held 12 tables, mismatched chairs, and a stone fireplace at the far end that had been burning continuously since October. It was the kind of place you ended up in, not the kind you planned for. 11 tables out of 12 were occupied. Cole Mercer had arrived before the storm turned serious, which was the only kind of planning he did anymore, not comprehensive, not optimistic, just enough ahead of the problem to keep it from becoming a crisis. He was 39 and looked it in the way that outdoor men look their age, every year accounted for, none of them wasted, all of them visible in the set of his jaw and the particular stillness he carried in his body, even when he was doing nothing more dangerous than reading a laminated menu. He won 215, most of it from years of work rather than a gym. His hair had gone from dark brown to something closer to iron gray at the temples in the last 2 years, which Sophie found fascinating, and Cole tried not to think about. His hands were rough in the specific way of men who use them constantly, not soft enough for an office, not delicate enough for surgery, exactly right for the kind of work that needed doing without ceremony. He'd been out of the Navy for 4 years. SEALs don't retire young unless something makes them, and what made Cole was Sophie's mother dying in the spring of 2021 from a cancer that moved faster than any of them had been prepared for. He'd requested separation papers within 60 days of the funeral, packed their belongings into a rented trailer, and driven Sophie from Virginia Beach to his family's farmhouse outside Ashford without once explaining to her why they were leaving. She was 6. She'd accepted it the way children accept the major upheavals of their lives completely and without the vocabulary to process it. She was 10, and she had plenty of vocabulary. She used most of it at dinner. "Ranger smells like wet leaves," Sophie announced, looking down at the German shepherd lying under the table beside her chair. The dog was 12, which in German shepherd years meant he operated somewhere between distinguished elder statesmen and politely controlled chaos. He'd been Cole's working dog, first trained for detection, cleared for deployment in 2 theaters, and had transitioned into civilian life with more grace than Cole had. "He smells like wet dog," Cole said, without looking up from the menu, which is what he is. "Can he have some of my bread?" "He's got his food." He looked at my bread. He looks at everything. That's what he does. Sophie considered this. She tore a corner off her bread roll anyway and held it below the table, where Cole couldn't technically see it. Ranger accepted it with the quiet dignity of a dog who had learned that patience was always rewarded. Cole saw it, he said nothing. The great room was loud with the particular noise of people stranded together, not the comfortable noise of a place people chose to be, but the slightly elevated, slightly irritated noise of people making the best of a situation they hadn't planned for. Two truckers shared a table by the window, checking their phones every 90 seconds for road updates. A middle-aged couple argued in low voices about something involving a reservation somewhere they clearly weren't going to make. Three college-age kids in ski gear had already ordered their second round of drinks and were getting progressively louder about it. Outside, sleet had begun. Cole could hear it against the windows, a dry, irregular ticking, like something trying to get in. He was watching the door when it opened. She came in sideways, the way you enter a space when you're managing a crutch and a heavy bag simultaneously, and you've learned to lead with your shoulder to get the door moving before you commit your weight. One movement, practiced and economical. The canvas bag hit her hip as she cleared the threshold. She caught her balance, without pause, without drama, and stood just inside the entrance while the cold rushed in behind her. The room didn't go quiet. It didn't do anything so cinematic as that. It just shifted. The way a room shifts when something enters it that the room hasn't agreed to accommodate. Conversations didn't stop. Eyes moved, then moved away. The kind of social invisibility that isn't accidental. Cole saw her clearly from his table at the back. 20-something, maybe mid-20s, if you looked past the exhaustion. Her left arm ended 4 inches below the shoulder. Not hidden, not displayed, just present. The sleeve of her jacket pinned back in a knot she'd long since stopped thinking about. The crutch was aluminum with a cracked foam grip, the kind that gets replaced every few years if you can afford to replace it. She was wearing heavy boots with worn-down heels, jeans, and a dark green jacket that had done a lot of work in its life. Her hair was dark and wet where the sleet had caught it, and she had the eyes of several hours worth deciding whether she was going to be okay. She crossed the room, not quickly, not slowly. The crutch found each footfall with the confidence of long practice, not graceful exactly. Because real competence rarely looks graceful from the outside. It just looks done, and she moved between the tables toward the far side of the room. Cole watched her stop at the first table. Watched the woman sitting there put her hand on the empty chair beside her. Watched her mouth form some version of sorry, someone sitting there. The man at the second table was already looking at his phone when she approached. He didn't look up. Third table, a family with 2 kids. The mother pulled her purse from the floor and set it on the empty chair with the practiced smooth thumbness of someone who had performed this move before in other rooms under other circumstances. Cole's jaw tightened. He'd seen this before, not here, in a roadside lodge in Pennsylvania during a sleet storm. But he'd seen it. The specific human behavior of making someone's presence the problem and solving the problem by redirecting it toward the door. Sophie was watching too. She'd stopped eating. "Dad," she said quietly, "I see it." The woman, the stranger, had reached the second-to-last table by now. 2 men in their 50s, hunters by the look of their gear, the orange and camo still bright from a recent purchase. One of them shook his head before she finished asking. The other stared at his plate. She didn't argue. She didn't make a face. She turned. There was one empty seat left in the room. One chair at the back table, beside a 10-year-old girl, an old dog, and a man who hadn't smiled in long enough that smiling felt like a foreign language he could still read but no longer speak fluently. She walked toward it. Cole watched her come the whole way. He didn't look away. When she stopped at the edge of the table and looked at the chair, just for half a second, the way you look at something you're not sure you're allowed to want, he reached over and pulled it out. Words yet. Just the chair moved 6 inches, unambiguous. She looked at him. He looked back. "Sit down," he said. "It's cold." Her name came out in pieces, the way it always does when you're exhausted and suspicious and not sure what the offer is actually costing you. She said, "Mara Vance." "Cole." He nodded toward the girl. "Sophie, the dog's ranger." Sophie was already leaning forward slightly, the way kids do when they've decided they're interested in someone and haven't yet learned to hide it. "What happened to your arm?" Sophie Cole started. It's fine, Mara said. She looked at Sophie directly, which Cole noticed. She didn't soften it, didn't redirect it, didn't perform the patient adult version of answering the question. She just answered it. Bone infection when I was 8. They had to take it before it spread. Sophie nodded, processing. Does the crutch hurt your hand? Sometimes. The grip's worn down. Dad could fix that. He fixes stuff. Mara glanced at Cole briefly, then back at Sophie. Cole signaled the server. The woman came over, and Mara ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, the soup, no bread and coffee. Black. She held the menu an extra second before returning it, and Cole suspected she'd been calculating, rather than deciding. He ordered a second bowl of the stew and told the server to put it on his tab before Mara could clarify that she hadn't asked for it. She caught it. He watched her decide whether to push back. I'm not accepting charity, she said. It wasn't aggressive, just factual. Like stating the temperature. I ordered extra stew. I don't want it. You can either eat it or I can throw it away. The logic was deliberate, and she knew it. She let it stand. Under the table, Ranger had moved. His large gray muzzle was now resting 4 inches from Mara's boot, not touching, just oriented. He did this sometimes with people he was checking on. Cole had long since stopped trying to explain it. He's not usually friendly, Sophie offered. He doesn't like strangers. I don't blame him, Mara said. The storm intensified after 8 o'clock. The sleet had graduated to something heavier, not snow, not quite ice, but the specific miserable hybrid that the Appalachian ridges produced when cold fronts collided over the gap. The windows of the great room ran with water that froze into rivulets and refroze again. Someone had added more wood to the fireplace, and the room had split into 2 temperatures, warm near the cold near the glass. Of the guests had retreated to their rooms. The college kids were still at their table, but quieter now, one of them asleep with his head on his arms. The truckers had given up on the road updates. Cole and Sophie and Mara were still at the back table. At some point, Cole couldn't have said exactly when the conversation had stopped being transactional and started being something else. Sophie had done most of the work. Sophie had done most of the way 10-year-olds will when they find someone interesting, pulling out information through the particular interrogation method of children who don't yet know they're supposed to pretend they're not curious. Mara had grown up in Carpenter County, the other side of the ridge. Her father had been a mechanic, her mother a schoolteacher. So she'd been on her own since she was 19 working seasonal jobs, saving money, moving. She didn't say where she was moving to. She didn't say where she was moving from. Cole noticed the gaps and didn't fill them. What's in the bag? Sophie asked. Sophie, Cole said. It's literally everything I own, Mara said, without embarrassment. Clothes, sketchbooks, a box of pencils, my phone charger, and a very bad novel I keep meaning to finish. What's it about? A woman who makes bad decisions and then has to live with them. That's why it's bad. Sophie laughed. Genuine, unguarded. The kind of laugh she used to do constantly, and that had grown rarer in the last 2 years. Cole looked at his daughter's face and felt something shift in his chest, some small tectonic movement of a thing he'd thought had gone permanently still. You draw? He asked Mara. She looked at him. It was the first real question he'd asked, the first one that wasn't operational. What do you need? Here's what I have. Take it or don't. Illustrations, mostly, she said. I'm applying to programs. There's a 2-year program in Pittsburgh She stopped. Started again. I'm working on the portfolio, the application. What do you draw? People in spaces, empty spaces mostly. She looked down at her coffee. Chairs at tables. Doorways. Rooms where you can tell someone used to be. Cole didn't say anything for a moment. That sounds specific, he said. It is. Outside, the sleet continued its patient, rhythmic assault against the glass. Ranger had fully settled now. His large body pressed against the side of Mara's boot, weight evenly distributed, and Mara had lowered her hand at some point without thinking about it. 2 fingers resting on the top of his way of someone who has reached for a dog as comfort, without registering the reaching. Cole noticed. He noticed all of it. The way Mara held herself upright, past the point of reasonable endurance. The way she scanned the room in brief intervals without appearing to. The way she'd clocked every exit when she walked in. Paranoid. Aware. He knew the difference. He'd trained himself for 2 decades to know the difference. She noticed that she had asked him anything about himself. 1 question. Which meant she was either completely self-contained, or she was too tired to perform curiosity. And he filed this away without acting on it, asking questions, sometimes opened doors you weren't ready to walk through yourself. The lodge manager, a heavy-set woman named Donna, came over at 9:15. "We're going to be full up tonight," she said, addressing Cole primarily. "Already turned 3 cars away. Road's gone. What about the diner on 30? One of the truckers called from across the room. Closed at 6. Church hall in town's taking overflow, but you can't get there. Not tonight." Cole looked at Mara. Mara was looking at her coffee cup, which had been empty for 20 minutes. He already knew what the answer was before he opened his mouth, which was unusual for him. He wasn't an impulsive man. He thought in mission parameters, objective, constraints, contingencies, acceptable outcomes. This felt less like a decision and more like an alignment, some situation clicking into the shape it had already determined itself to take. "I've got a spare room," he said. "Farmhouse is 8 minutes from here. If the roads were passable, which they're not, so you'd have to." "I'm not your charity case," Mara said. "Not heated. Flat, I know that. I'm serious. I'm not to... The room's there whether you use it or not. It doesn't cost me anything. You can pay me back by..." He paused, genuinely unsure what he'd been about to say. "By not freezing to death in the parking lot." Silence. "There's a cot in the storage room," Donna offered from behind them. "I can set it up for 8 minutes," Cole said. "In a truck with 4-wheel drive, or a cot in a storage room." Mara looked at him. The look was longer than the previous ones, the kind of look that was actually a calculation, an assessment, the rapid processing of threat versus need versus pride versus pragmatism. She looked at Sophie, who was trying very hard to appear uninterested in the outcome. She looked at Ranger, who had raised his head and was watching her with his large amber eyes, and the serene patience of a dog who has long since concluded that humans are not his to manage. "One night," she said. "Roads open up when they open up," Cole said. It was as close to a concession as he was willing to make, and she seemed to understand that. She picked up her canvas bag. The farmhouse was 6.8 miles from Pine Hollow, most of it on a single-lane road that Cole navigated with the automatic competence of someone who had driven worse terrain in worse conditions with considerably higher stakes. The truck's 4-wheel drive engaged with a grinding click on the first hill, and after that, the ride was steady if slow, the headlights cutting a white tunnel through the falling sleet. Sophie fell asleep in the back seat before they'd gone 2 miles, her head against Ranger's broad side, the dog awake but still. Cole and Mara didn't talk. The radio was off. The only sound was the heater, the wipers, and the irregular crack of ice under the tires. The farmhouse appeared at the end of a gravel drive, its porch light burning against the dark. It was old, built in the 40s, added onto in the 60s, left largely alone since then, and it looked exactly like what it was, a house that had held a family through several generations of hard work, and expected to hold several more. Porch boards were solid. The roof had been replaced 2 years ago. The barn out back was Cole's workshop. He didn't explain any of this to Mara. He just pulled up, cut the engine, and got Sophie out of the back seat, with the practiced efficiency of a parent who has carried sleeping children many more times than he ever expected to. Got herself out, got her bag, got her crutch, made it to the porch without assistance and without being asked if she needed it. Cole unlocked the front door. The smell inside was wood smoke and something else, a faint trace of machine oil from the workshop, Sophie's cereal from this morning, old wood that had been dry and warm for decades. A showroom, not unwelcoming. Mara stood in the doorway for just a moment. Just one. He showed her the spare room's second door on the left, clean sheets, the bathroom at the end of the hall. There was a quilt on the bed that had been his mother's. He didn't mention that. Heat runs off the main furnace. If it gets too warm, it's fine, there's a window. Second panel from the left slides. Cole. She said his name with a kind of careful precision, like she'd been thinking about how to use it. Okay. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Not awkward. Just present. "Good night," he said. "Good night." He pulled the door mostly closed. He went to Sophie's room, pulled her boots off, covered her, turned off the light. He stood in the dark hallway for a moment outside his own door. Down the hall, behind the second door on the left, he could hear the soft, irregular sound of a crutch touching the floor as Mara moved around the room, the creak of the old bed as she sat. Then silence. He went to bed. He didn't sleep for a long time. By the third day, no one had said when she was leaving. This wasn't discussed. It didn't need to be. The roads had opened briefly on the second morning, closed again by afternoon when the temperature dropped and the thaw refroze. Mara had called ahead about temporary housing in Ashford, 2 calls, 3 calls, the county shelter, that turned out to have a 2-week waiting list, a church program that wasn't taking placements until February. Each conversation she'd had standing near the kitchen window, voice low, back to the room. Cole hadn't asked about any of it. Sophie had. "Are you staying?" She'd asked at breakfast that second morning, direct as only children can be, with no softening and no subtext. Mara had looked at Cole briefly. He kept his eyes on the coffee he was making. "No yet," Mara said. "I hope you do," Sophie said, and returned to her cereal. Ranger had moved by then. Not in a dramatic way, just incrementally, the way old dogs shift their gravitational centers. He'd spent the first night in Cole's room as always, the second half of it at the threshold of the hallway. And by the third morning was parked squarely outside the second door on the left, waiting for Mara to emerge, which she eventually did, stepping carefully over him, with the practiced negotiation of someone who had learned not to expect clearance. In the workshop, Mara had found a pile of leather straps tack equipment Cole had been meaning to repair for 2 months and hadn't had time to get to. She'd been in there for 3 hours the second afternoon before Cole came in and found her cross-legged on the workbench, the old saddle-stitching needle he used for leather in her right hand, a damaged bridle spread across her knee, the entire pile of straps neatly organized by damage type on the bench beside her. He stopped. "I found the wax thread in the drawer," she said without looking up. "If you'd rather I didn't, it's fine." He watched her work for a moment. The needle moved with confidence, not the confidence of someone showing off, but the confidence of someone who learned this with their hands and doesn't think about it anymore. "My father taught me," she said, still not looking up. "He worked on leather in his shop. Said it was the same principles as mechanical work. You find the failure point. You reinforce it. You don't patch what should be replaced." Cole sat on the stool across from her. "Where's your father now?" he asked. The needle stopped moving for half a second, then started again. "He died," she said, "when I was 11. Cole didn't say he was sorry. He said, 'How?' which was a different thing to say, and she noticed. Industrial accident. Construction site. He'd taken work out of county. She pulled the thread through. He was a mechanic originally, but the shop work dried up when she stopped. Reset, it dried up. He took what there was." Cole was quiet for a long moment. "What was his name?" Mara finally looked up. Her eyes were steady, direct. She had the kind of face that didn't do ambiguous, not because she was uncomplicated, but because she'd long since decided that clarity was a form of protection. "Daniel Vance." Cole's hand, resting flat on the workbench beside him, went very still. Something moved through his face, not fear exactly, and not recognition exactly, but the specific expression of a man who has just heard a word he has been both dreading and somehow always expecting. Mara saw it. "Did you know him?" she asked. Cole said nothing. The workshop was very quiet. Outside, the wind had picked up again, and somewhere in the barn's upper structure a timber creaked with the weight of accumulated ice. Set the needle down on the bench. Cole. He got up from the stool, crossed to the far side of the workshop. In the corner on a shelf below his old gear bags, the ones from his service years, the ones he hadn't unpacked and hadn't thrown away, there was a wooden box. He reached up to it with both hands, brought it down. He set it on the workbench. He opened it. Inside was a collection of things from his time in Patches, a citation, a photograph, a folded letter, and beneath all of it, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth, something he'd carried since he left the hospital 14 years ago and had never been able to bring himself to either keep properly or throw away. He unwrapped it. A leather belt, old dark brown, nearly black with age. Handmade or hand-modified, the holes weren't. Factory punched. They were cut. 3 of them, spaced unevenly, one with a crooked angle where the tool had slipped. The buckle was worn silver. One edge had a scorched line along it, maybe 2 inches. The leather darkened and slightly stiff. He put it on the workbench between them. Mara looked at it. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Cole counted without meaning to old operational habit. the brain measuring intervals even when the rest of you is standing very still. Mara's face changed. Not broke. Changed. The way stone changes when water gets into the fault lines and the temperature drops, something irreversible occurring below the surface. Pressure finding shape. Her right hand moved across the workbench and touched the belt. Just touched it. Fingertips. 3 cut marks. 1 crooked hole. Scorched edge. Her voice came out quiet. So quiet Cole almost didn't hear it under the wind. "Where did you get my father's belt?" The workshop held the silence for a long moment. Cole's mouth opened, then closed. The overhead light hummed. Ranger, who had been lying by the workshop door, raised his head and looked at both of them in turn with the patient, serious attention of a dog who understands that something significant is happening, even if he cannot name it. Mara's hand stayed flat on the belt. She wasn't looking at Cole anymore. She was looking at the 3 cut marks, the crooked hole, the scorched edge that she had touched before, as a child in her father's workshop, when she was small enough to stand between his knees while he worked and reach up to touch the tools on his bench, and he'd let her because he believed that hands should learn things. She said again, and this time it wasn't quiet. This time it had weight. Cole's jaw worked, and in the absolute worst possible moment, in the exact second when he would have had to answer, Sophie's voice came from the doorway of the barn, bright and unaware, and cutting through everything like light through a shutter. "Dad, dinner's almost ready. I made the pasta thing you showed me." She stopped. She looked at Cole, looked at Mara, looked at the belt on the workbench. She understood, with the absolute animal instinct of a child raised around a man who didn't waste silences, that something had just happened. "Sorry," she said, uncertain. "I can give us a minute," Cole said. His voice was even, controlled. The voice that meant he was not controlled at all. Sophie backed out of the doorway. Ranger got up from the floor, crossed to Mara's side, pressed his head against her knee, and Mara's hand, still flat on her dead father's belt, did not move. Cole didn't answer right away. That was its own kind of answer. He stood on his side of the workbench with his hands flat on the surface and the belt between them. Mara watched his face do the thing that faces do when a person is choosing between 2 versions of the truth, the one that costs less and the one that costs everything. She'd seen that calculation before. She'd performed it herself. Exactly how long it took. And she waited without filling the silence because she had learned. Somewhere in the years of being alone, that silence was the only tool that couldn't be deflected. Outside the barn, the wind moved across the ridge in long pulls, and the ice in the gutters above the workshop door shifted and cracked. Ranger stayed pressed against Mara's knee. His breathing was even and slow, the patient breathing of an old dog who has sat through enough human difficulty to know that staying put was the only useful thing he could offer. Cole finally looked up. His eyes were steady. Whatever decision he'd made it completely, which was the only way he made anything. "Sit down," he said. "I'm standing fine, Mara. Tell me where you got it." He pulled the stool from under the bench and sat on it himself, which meant he was no longer positioned above her, no longer across from her in the standing upright way that could read as authority. It was a small adjustment, deliberate. She clocked it. 14 years ago, he said. January, I was coming down Route 9 at a Ridgeline night run. Roads were bad, worse than tonight. He stopped. I was driving too fast. Mara said nothing. The truck went off the road on the lower switchback, about 200 feet of embankment before the creek. I went through the guardrail. He said it matter-of-factly, not performing the drama of it, just placing the facts in order. Cab came to rest against a stand of timber about 40 feet down. Fractured 3 ribs, broke my left wrist. Concussion that put me out for I don't know how long exactly. 10 minutes, maybe more. Who found you? A man who was driving in the opposite direction. Saw the gap in the guardrail. Came down the embankment on foot. Cole looked at the belt. He used that to brace my wrist before the paramedics arrived. Wouldn't leave. Stayed with me in the cold, for I found out later it was almost 2 hours before the ambulance got through. Mara's right hand curled slowly on the workbench surface. A fist, just a closing. He told you his name, she said. Daniel Vance. The name in Cole's mouth was a different thing than the name in hers. She could hear the weight he gave it, not performed weight, not the careful solemnity of someone who has rehearsed this, but the particular heaviness of a name that has been carried a long time without being put down. He left you his belt, she said. He forgot it, or Cole paused. Or he left it on purpose. I never got to ask. Did you try? The question landed clean and sharp like a tool set down on metal. Cole's jaw tightened. Yes. Once the pause was a fraction of a second too long. I made calls, he said, while I was still in the hospital. Left a message at a number that went to a shop in Carpenter County. Got a letter back a few weeks later, said Daniel didn't work there anymore. It wasn't a question. And then I was deployed to, Cole said. 6 weeks after discharge from the hospital. Helmand Province. 14 months. Mara looked at him for a long moment. His face had gone still in a way that wasn't calm. It was the stillness of something under very high pressure. The kind that doesn't move, because movement would mean it had already broken. You came back from Helmand, she said. Yes, and you didn't look for him. Cole said nothing. You had his name. You had the county. You had a belt with his tool marks on it. Her voice hadn't risen. It was still level, still precise. And you didn't look for him. My father died 14 months after that accident. She said it without inflection, without anything that could be called emotion in the conventional sense, which made it worse than if she'd been shouting. He lost his job at the shop. You knew what he did for a living, he told you, while you were lying in the cab of a wrecked truck in January. He was a mechanic. That shop was... She stopped, took a breath. He took construction work because there wasn't anything else. He died on a site in Clearfield County in March. He was 41. Cole's hands pressed flat against the workbench. Mara, I'm not done, still level, still precise. I was 11 years old. My mother worked at an elementary school. We had a house with a mortgage my father was carrying and a truck payment, and none of that is your problem. I'm not saying you owe me anything. She looked directly at him. I'm saying you owed him. You owed him one more call, one more letter. You owed it. Her voice broke, not into tears, into something harder, the break that happens when you've been holding a thing clenched for so long that the muscles finally, against your will, release. She picked up her canvas bag from the floor where she'd set it when she started working on the leather. She picked up her crutch. Thank you for the room, she said. I'll be out in the morning. She walked past Ranger, who turned and watched her go. She walked past Cole, who stood where he was, because he had enough sense to know that stopping her was not the right move, and enough control to execute on that knowledge, even when everything in him was pulling the other direction. She went out of the workshop into the dark and the wind. Cole stood at the workbench and looked at the belt. After a moment, he picked it up, wrapped it back in the oilcloth, and put it in the box. He carried the box back to the shelf and stood there with his hand on it, for a moment, not doing anything, just standing. Ranger came and sat beside him. Yeah, Cole said to the dog. Neither of them moved for a while. Sophie was in the kitchen when he came back inside, the pasta she'd made, sitting in a pot on the stove, a bowl set out at each of 3 places at the table. She'd used the good placemats, the woven ones her mother had picked up at a craft fair years ago, the ones Cole usually only put out on Sundays, without being able to explain why. She looked at his face and didn't ask anything. He served the food. They ate.
The third bowl sat at the third place, and neither of them acknowledged it until Sophie pushed her pasta
around for a minute and said, She's not coming in, is she? Is she leaving tomorrow? She said so. Sophie set her fork down. She had his eyes, that particular shade of gray-green that looked different in different lights, and right now they looked the way his did when he was working through a problem that didn't have a clean solution, methodical and unhappy. She's mad at you, Sophie said. Yes, for something that happened before. Is she wrong to be? Cole looked at his daughter. She was 10 years old, and she asked questions like this with complete seriousness, which he'd always respected and occasionally found exhausting. He thought about the quick answer, the measured parental answer, the answer that was technically defensible. No, he said. She's not wrong. Sophie picked her fork back up. What are you going to do about it? He didn't answer. She didn't push. They finished dinner in a quiet, that was companionable enough to carry both of them through, and afterward she washed up without being asked, which she only did when she understood something significant had happened and wanted to be useful in the only way currently available. Cole went to the living room and sat in the dark for a long time without turning on a light. He heard Mara moving in her room around 10:30, the specific sound sequence he'd learned over the past 3 days. Crutch tap, pause, the soft creak of the loose floorboard near the window, the sound of the old radiator ticking as the heat came up. He'd learned her movement pattern the way he used to learn a building's layout before a clearance, not surveillance. Just the automatic cataloging of a brain trained to know its environment. At 11, he heard the sequence again, then the door. He was in the kitchen before he'd made a conscious decision to get up. She was standing at the back door, with her canvas bag on her shoulder and her crutch in her right hand. She put her jacket on, her boots. She was not looking at him, she was looking at the door handle. "It's 11 o'clock, Cole said. "I know what time it is. It's 22 degrees outside. The road won't be passable until I'll manage." "Manage where? To the highway?" "There's nothing on the highway until—" She turned and looked at him. Her face was very controlled and very tired, and underneath both of those things was something raw that she was working hard not to let him see. "I cannot be in this house right now. I cannot sit in that room and look at the ceiling and be in the same building as that box." He understood that, completely and without argument. "All right," he said. "Then come to the kitchen." "What? You can be mad at me in the kitchen. You don't have to go outside to do it." He moved to the counter and started filling the kettle, not looking at her. "I'm making tea. You can tell me to go to hell and drink tea at the same time. It's not that complicated." Silence behind him. He put the kettle on. He heard the sound of the back door not opening. He heard the canvas bag hit the floor. He heard the crutch on the tile as she came in and pulled a chair out from the kitchen table, not the chair she'd been using. A different one, the one at the corner, positioning herself at an angle from where he stood. He made the tea, set both mugs on the table, sat across from her, not at the corner, not adjacent across, where she could see his face and where he couldn't maneuver around what she was going to say. She wrapped both her hand and her residual arm around the mug and looked at him. "Tell me what you remember about him," she said. So Cole told her. He told her about the cold, not atmospheric cold, but the specific cold of lying in a crumpled cab with a fractured wrist and cracked ribs and the smell of antifreeze and the sound of the creek below, and being conscious enough to know he was in trouble, but not conscious enough to manage it. He told her about the light, not a flashlight at first, just a voice calling down from the road, asking if there was somebody there. Particular phrasing of a man who was still hoping the answer would be no, because the answer yes was going to cost him a descent down a 200-foot icy embankment in January. He told her that Daniel came down anyway. He told her what he remembered of his face, the frown that was concentration rather than displeasure, the steady hands, the complete absence of panic in a situation that warranted it. He told her that Daniel had talked to him the whole time, not to comfort him, or not only to comfort him, but to keep him conscious, to give him something to follow with his ears when his eyes kept trying to close. He remembered Daniel talking about a truck engine he'd been rebuilding for 3 weeks that was finally running clean, about his kid's drawing that was on the refrigerator at home, the specific satisfaction of a thing working the way it's supposed to work. "He talked about me," Mara said. "Not a question. He said your name. He said his daughter drew things that made no sense to him, but were always exactly right when you figured out what you were looking at." Mara looked down at her tea. "That's exactly what he used to say." Cole put both hands around his mug. He was the most calm person I have ever encountered in a genuine emergency. And I have been in emergencies that make that accident look like a parking ticket. "He grew up in the mountains," Mara said. He said panic was for people who hadn't thought about bad weather ahead of time. A pause. Something almost like a smile crossed her face, a shadow of one, and then it was gone. He had a whole philosophy about it. He told me. While I was bleeding in his lap, he told me about the philosophy of not panicking. That's him. They sat with that for a moment. The kettle had gone cold. The kitchen was warm enough and quiet enough that the refrigerator hum was audible. "What losing him cost you," Cole said. "I know I can't fix what I should have done differently." He was not a man who spoke easily about failure, because he lacked self-awareness, but because his training had made him allergic to excuses, and speaking about failure out loud always risked dressing it up as explanation. "I should have looked harder." I had his name. I had his voice stopped, restarted. I had 6 months between deployments in 2013, and I didn't use it to find him. That's true. There's no version of it that's different. Mara looked at him. Why didn't you, she asked. He thought about not answering. He thought about the answer that was partial, the deployment excuse, the operational tempo, the genuine difficulty of finding a civilian mechanic in a county he'd never been to. All of it was real. None of it was the complete reason. Because I was afraid of what I'd find out, he said. That he was fine. That he'd moved on and didn't think about it, and I was just a stranger he'd helped once. He stopped. The other thing. That he wasn't fine. Either way, I'd have to live with being the reason for it. He wasn't fine, Mara said. And you lived with it anyway, except you didn't know. So you got to decide what version to live with. Yes, she stood up. He didn't move. She carried her mug to the sink and ran water in it, turned it upside down to drain. She stood at the sink with her back to him for a moment, and her shoulders were doing something, not crying, not visibly, but the subtle movement of someone breathing through something that needed breathing through. I don't know what to do with this, she said, to the window above the sink. I've been angry about it for 14 years and I didn't even know what I was angry at. I just knew there was a gap. Something that should have been there and wasn't. She turned around. Her face was steady again, the control rebuilt. And then you pull out a chair in a lodge I'd never been in before, and it turns out you were the gap. Cole said nothing. That's not a thing that happens, she said. It's too much of a thing to be a thing that just happens. She picked up her canvas bag from where she left it by the door. He'd intervened. She didn't put her jacket on. She just held the bag by the strap and looked at him across the kitchen and seemed to be trying to figure out what question to ask next when there's too many to rank. No. The morning, she said finally. We can, whatever, but I need to sleep. Okay. I'm not forgiving you. I want to be clear about that. You don't have to. I'm just stating it, I hear you. She went down the hall. He listened to the door of the spare room, close, not slam, just close, firmly, the latch clicking home. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time after, in the quiet of a house where all the damage had been done a long time ago and was only now making itself visible. The roads opened on the 5th day. Or rather, one road opened Route 6 down the eastern side of the ridge, which the county had prioritized, because it was the only school route that served 3 districts. The western approach, which was the faster way down and the way Mara would need to go if she was heading towards Sandsman bus terminal, remained closed until further notice. Mara found this out by calling the county road information line at 7 in the morning and standing in the kitchen while Cole made coffee, neither of them discussing the fact that she'd been making calls like this every morning since the first night, and the answers had so far always been the same. This time the answer was different, or half different. She hung up the phone. East route's open, she said. I checked at 6. She looked at him. You checked. Weather habit. I checked the road conditions every morning. And you didn't tell me. I was going to when you woke up. She set the phone on the counter. He poured a cup of coffee and put it at her place at the table without asking. She sat down. She wrapped her hand around the mug and stared at the steam rising from it. Bus terminal in Ashford connects to Pittsburgh twice a day, she said. 11:15 and 4:40. I know the schedule. She looked at him again. There was something in the look, not suspicion exactly, more like the recalibration you do when you've built an accurate map of someone, and then one detail doesn't fit. You looked that up too, she said. He sat down across from her. The eastern route adds time. I thought you might want options. Options, she repeated. You don't have to take them. She drank her coffee. Through the kitchen window the morning was gray, but clearing the sky the white of old snow, rather quichishful, not rather than the dark of new weather. The ridge visible for the first time in 5 days, its tree line sharp against the pale sky. Sophie came downstairs in her school clothes. At 7:30, her backpack already on, which meant she already knew the roads were open, which meant she'd checked somehow her tablet, probably, from bed, before Cole was even up. She'd done that kind of thing since she was 8. She had his operational brain in a 10-year-old's body, which was as useful as it was occasionally alarming. She looked at the table, at the 2 cups, at Mara's bag by the door where she'd left it last night. School's on? She asked Cole. Bus runs at 8. Sophie nodded. She sat down and poured herself cereal and ate it with her eyes on the window, very deliberately not asking the question that was the only question she was interested in. Mara watched her do this. Something in Mara's expression shifted, the particular shift that happens when a person recognizes a coping strategy because they invented a version of it themselves. Sophie, she said. Sophie looked up. I'm going to be here when you get back from school. Sophie processed this, looked at Cole, looked at Mara. Today. A pause. What about tomorrow? Sophie asked. No yet, Mara said. But today. Sophie nodded, apparently satisfied, and finished her cereal. The morning after that conversation with the roads technically passable, and the 11:15 bus a theoretical option, Mara stayed. She didn't announce this. She didn't renegotiate. She simply didn't put her jacket on at 9:30, which was the only announcement that mattered. She went to the workshop instead. Cole was in there replacing a shear pin on the tractor drive shaft, a job that required lying on cold concrete under the machine's rear housing with a drop light and a socket set, the kind of work that was uncomfortable and exacting, and had to be done right or it would shear again in a month. He heard the workshop door open, heard the crutch on the concrete floor, felt, rather saw the additional light as she moved the drop cord out of her way and settled on the workbench stool. She picked up the bridle she'd been working on before everything came apart 3 days ago. Neither of them said anything for a while. The crooked hole in the belt, she said eventually. Second from the right. He made that one late at night when he was tired. I remember because I was sitting on the commode watching him and he slipped and I laughed, and he laughed too. She pushed the needle through the leather. That's the one I always looked at. When I still had the belt. I'll give it back, Cole said from under the tractor. I don't want it back. A pause. The socket wrench clicked against the drive shaft housing. Then what do you want? He asked. She sat with that question. For a long moment, the needle stopped in the stitch. The leather held steady in her right hand. I want to know what he was like when he came down that embankment, she said. I want to know what he said. All of it. Every word you remember. Because I was 11 when he died, and I've been losing pieces of him for 14 years, and you have pieces I don't have. She pulled the thread through. That's what I want. Cole's arm moved. The socket wrench made 3 more turns, then stopped. Okay, he said, okay. I remember most of it, he said. I'll tell you all of it. He said it simply, without making it into a promise or a performance. Just a statement of what was going to happen. Mara looked down at the bridle in her hand, and the needle went back into the leather, and the work continued. Outside, the ridge was fully visible now. The ice in the trees had started to melt. From inside the workshop, if you were listening for it, you could hear it, the slow, irregular drip of thaw, water letting go of the places it had held all winter, falling into the ground. It was not resolution, not even close, but it was the first sound the thaw makes, before anything else is ready to be said. By the second week, the spare room at the end of the hall had accumulated evidence. Sketchbooks on the nightstand, a second pair of boots by the door, a length of wax thread she'd bought at the hardware store in Ashford, coiled on the dresser. Ranger's water bowl, he'd moved it himself. No one could figure out exactly when sitting just inside her door. Cole's neighbor, a 63-year-old farmer named Walt Greer, who had known Cole since he was a teenager and had opinions about most things, drove up the gravel drive on a Tuesday afternoon while Cole was splitting firewood and Mara was on the porch steps with a sketchbook open on her knee. Walt was out of his truck before it had fully stopped, which was his characteristic approach to most situations. He glanced at Mara. Then he looked at Cole. He did the particular arithmetic that older men who've known you since childhood perform when they want to understand a situation without asking directly about it. Who's that? He said, not quietly enough. Guest, Cole said. He set a split log on the stack. How long has your guest been here? Walt looked at the porch again. Mara was drawing. She appeared to have not heard them, or she had decided not to have heard them, which was a different thing. Walt had the particular local man's unease about situations he didn't have a name for, the kind of unease that manifested as concern-shaped but was actually curiosity-shaped. Cole, Walt said. She's staying here? For now. You know anything about her? Cole set down the axe. He looked at Walt with the patient, level look that had ended conversations in 2 hemispheres. He said, I know enough. Walt read the look and changed course. You need anything? I'm good. Walt glanced at the porch one more time. Mara had turned a page and was working on something new, apparently absorbed, the crutch leaning against the porch rail beside her. He shrugged, a man making peace with information he wasn't going to get, and got back in his truck. Cole picked up the axe and looked at the porch. Mara turned another page. She hadn't looked up once, but the corner of her mouth had moved slightly during the Walt conversation, not a smile, just the minimal expression of someone who heard everything and found something in it worth registering. Cole found he didn't mind that she'd heard it. He didn't mind any of it, which was the information he was least sure what to do with. He'd intervened. She found her way into his routines, the way water finds its way into any structure through the gaps that were already there, the ones that hadn't been noticeable until something else revealed their shape. He cooked breakfast. She cleaned up after it. Yes, he'd intervened. He ran the morning perimeter on the property, a habit from his service years that he'd never broken. A 15-minute walk of the fence line that was now purely about the walk and not about anything it used to mean. She was on the porch when he came back, 2 cups of coffee made, one set on the rail, at a height that worked if you were holding a crutch and couldn't set things on low surfaces easily. He noticed this adjustment. He didn't comment on it. Sophie came home from school on a Wednesday with a permission slip for a spring field trip that required 2 chaperones, and she asked Mara to sign it before she asked Cole, which Cole only found out about afterward, when Sophie mentioned it, without apparent awareness that it was significant. I told her I'm not a guardian, Mara said that evening, while Cole was reading at the table, and she was at the other end of it, working on a new series of sketches. What did she say? She said she knows, she just wanted you to have help. A pause. She also said, you're terrible at chaperoning because you make the other parents nervous. Cole turned a page. That's accurate. Mara looked at a sketch, then turned it upside down and looked at it again. It was something she did to check proportions. He'd noticed her doing it 3 times now. She's a good kid. I know. She's used to making herself useful when things are complicated. Mara set the sketchbook down. She does it so naturally. She doesn't know she's doing it. That's the kind of thing you learn young. Cole looked up from his book, was looking at her sketch. Not at him. She learned it from somewhere, Cole said. I know where she learned it. The room was quiet. The fire in the living room had burned down to embers, and the house was warm, in the kind of dark that's comfortable, rather than empty. You stayed, he said. It wasn't a question, but it wasn't quite a statement either. It was the thing that had been sitting between them for a week, made audible. Pulled the sketchbook back toward her. I'm still deciding what that means, she said. Cole went back to his book, but he turned the page without having read the one he was leaving. She was still deciding what it meant when the 3rd week arrived, and the decision made itself, the way most real decisions do, not in a moment of clarity, but in the accumulation of small facts that eventually reach a weight that the mind can no longer redistribute. The sketchbooks multiplied. The wax thread became a permanent fixture on the workbench. Ranger's water bowl stayed inside her door, without anyone moving it back. Sophie left a book on her nightstand, a collection of illustration work by a woman from Pittsburgh, who had done commissions for 3 major publishing houses, with a post-it on the cover that said, "Only thought you'd like this." Sophie's handwriting still at the stage where capital letters occasionally appeared mid-word by accident. Mara read it in 2 evenings. She didn't mention it to Sophie, but she left it visible on the nightstand instead of putting it away, which Sophie noticed and understood as the response it was. Cole noticed all of this. He cataloged it with the same automatic precision he'd always applied to his environment, and he did not act on any of it, because there was a version of this situation in which his acting on it ruined the thing it was becoming. Yes, he'd intervened, and he was experienced enough to know that the best tactical decision was sometimes to hold position and let the situation develop. This was not a comfortable posture for him. It was, however, the correct one. What he couldn't have predicted was the Thursday. The Thursday started badly in the specific way that bad days often start, not with catastrophe, but with the small mechanical failures that accumulate into atmosphere. The truck wouldn't turn over on the first try, which it hadn't been done since October, which meant the battery was going. The school called at 8:15 to say Sophie's science project partner had dropped out, and the project was due in 2 days, and Sophie needed a parent to come in for a brief meeting with the teacher after school. Cole had a delivery scheduled that afternoon, lumber he'd ordered for the barn repair, A standing order he'd rescheduled twice already, and the delivery window was 3 to 5, which overlapped exactly with Sophie's meeting. Khan was in the kitchen working through the scheduling problem when his phone rang. The number was a Pittsburgh area code he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer. He answered. The voice on the other end was a woman who identified herself as a coordinator at Westmore Arts Foundation, which Cole had never heard of, calling about a letter of recommendation they'd received as part of an application for their 2-year illustration strains residency program. They had a question about the application timeline and had been trying to reach the applicant, Mara Vance, at the contact number provided, which had apparently been disconnected. Cole stood very still. She's here, he said. I can get her. A pause on the line. You're listed as an emergency contact. Cole was very sure Mara had not listed him as an emergency contact. He was very sure she had listed someone else, and that number had changed, or been wrong, or been written down wrong in the application. He was also very sure that pointing this out would complicate a situation that was already complicated enough. Let me get her, he said. He walked down the hall and knocked on her door. She was up, he could tell, by the light under the door and the absence of that particular morning stillness. Phone for you, he said through the door. A pause. Who is it? Foundation in Pittsburgh. About an application. The door opened faster than he expected. She was dressed, her sketchbook open on the bed behind her, 3 drawings laid out in a row. She looked at the phone he was holding out, and something moved across her face. Not excitement. Not yet. Something more guarded than excitement, the expression of someone who has hoped for things before and knows what hoping costs. She took the phone. He went back to the kitchen. He heard her voice from the hallway. Not the words, just the register of it, and the way it changed after the first 30 seconds, from careful and neutral to something more alert. He heard her say yes twice, then something he couldn't make out, then a laugh short, involuntary, the kind that comes out before you can manage it. He was pouring coffee when she appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding his phone at her side. They want an interview, she said. When? 2 weeks. She looked down at the phone. In person. Pittsburgh. That's good. Yeah. She set the phone on the counter. They said my portfolio letter was the strongest in the application pool. The work was, she stopped, looked at the counter. They said the empty chairs series was the strongest piece. Cole waited. I did those here, she said, in the last 2 weeks. I drew them at the kitchen table. She looked up, on the back of Sophie's homework paper, because I'd run out of sketchbook pages. The kitchen was quiet, except for the coffee maker, and the particular outside quiet of a clearing morning. The ridge finally showing color for the first time in weeks. The birch trees along the fence line beginning their early February attempt at something like optimism. You should go, Cole said. I know. Not, he paused. I mean, you should go to the interview. In 2 weeks. I'll drive you. She looked at him for a moment, reading it, checking for the subtext. You don't have to 8 minutes from here to the highway, 2.5 hours to Pittsburgh. You'd need to be there by 10. He refilled his coffee. It's a drive, not a commitment. She was quiet for a moment. Yeah. Stop doing that. Doing what? Making things simple when they're not. He looked at her over the rim of his cup. It is simple. You have an interview. The interview is in Pittsburgh. I have a truck. That's not what I mean, and you know it. He set the cup down. All right. We haven't talked about... She stopped. Reorganized. I've been here 3 weeks. 22 days, he said. He said it without thinking, and then registered that he'd said it, and could see by her expression that she'd registered it too. 22 days he'd been counting. He hadn't decided to count. His brain had just been doing it. The way it counted things, intervals, distances, the number of times Ranger's tail moved when Mara came into a room, the number of drawings she'd produced and turned face down on the nightstand versus the one she left visible. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully categorize, which was unusual. He could categorize most expressions. 22 days, she said. Yeah, you don't have to do anything with that information. What if I don't know what to do with it? Then you don't do anything, he said. The interview is in 2 weeks. That's a real thing. Everything else can wait. She stood in the doorway for another moment. Then she nodded once and went back down the hall. He heard her pick up her phone, her own phone, not his, and make another call. Something about confirming the interview time. her voice clear and composed in the way she composed herself when she needed to function through something that was larger than the function required. Cole drank his coffee and thought about the truck battery and the lumber delivery and Sophie's science project meeting, all of which remained unsolved. He added them to the list of things to manage and manage them, one at a time, through the rest of the morning. It was the last ordinary Thursday for a while. The incident happened on a Saturday. The hardware store in Ashford was a family-run operation on the main street. Two brothers named Garrett and Phil Sauer, who had inherited the place from their father and run it with the particular combination of efficiency and a simp that characterized every small-town institution where people went not just to buy things but to know what was happening. Cole had a tab there. He'd been buying from them for 4 years. It was fine. He brought Mara because she needed a new grip for her crutch. The foam had finally given out completely, worn to bare metal on one side, and the Sauer brothers carried adaptive equipment supplies in a back aisle that most people didn't know about. The store was moderately busy for a Saturday. A few families, some contractors, picking up weekend project supplies. An older man, Cole, recognized as someone who played cards with Walt on Wednesday nights and had opinions about property taxes that Cole had once been unable to escape for 35 minutes. They were in the adaptive equipment aisle. Mara, comparing two grip options, holding them up to the crutch bar in turn when Garrett Sauer appeared at the end of the aisle. Garrett was 45 and had his father's build and his mother's mouth, which was to say he was large and he talked. Seen Cole come in with Mara, and he'd had 12 minutes to form an opinion. Cole, he said, thumbs in his apron pockets, in the tone of a man making conversation that was not really conversation. You had company. Errands, Cole said. Garrett looked at Mara, directly the way men look at someone when they've decided the someone is an object of assessment rather than a person in the room. His eyes moved from her face to her shoulder to the crutch, to the canvas bag she had over her arm. You passing through? He asked her. Buying a grip, Mara said. She held up both options without looking at him. She'd already decided. Cole could tell the red one, which had a better contour for extended use, but she was giving herself the time of the second option. Staying around? Garrett pressed. Not your business, Cole said. Not aggressive, just a door closed. Garrett looked at Cole. Something in his expression shifted into the register of a man who's been told something he doesn't like, Kent, and is deciding whether to accept the information or work around it. Known Cole long enough to know that Cole didn't escalate unnecessarily. He had also known Cole long enough to know that Cole escalated exactly as far as necessary and did not stop before that point. He let it go, partially. Phil was asking, he said, which was the classic small-town move of distributing an opinion across an imaginary consensus. People notice things in a town this size. Good for them, Cole said. Garrett shrugged the shrug of a man performing unconcern and moved on up the aisle. Cole turned back to Mara. She'd put both grips down. She was standing with her hand flat on the shelf and her eyes straight ahead at the middle distance, and the expression on her face was one he'd seen before in the lodge. The first night, when she'd made her way past 11 tables and 11 versions of the same message. The expression of someone who has absorbed something and is currently deciding where to put to set it so that it doesn't take up the space she needs for other things. Red one, he said. She looked at him. Better contour, he said, for the way you grip. She picked up the red one. She looked at it for a moment. You've been watching how I grip. I watch how everyone does everything. It's a problem. Something that wasn't quite a smile. It's not entirely a problem. She put the red grip in her bag and they went to the register. Garrett's brother Phil rang them up without commentary, which was either diplomacy or ignorance, and Cole didn't care which. Outside, the main street was quiet and cold. The February light, the flat white kind that made everything look like a photocopy of itself. Mara stopped on the sidewalk and looked up the street, then down it, in the automatic way of someone's assessing an environment. How long has this been your town? She asked. 4 years. They're always going to wonder about me. They wonder about everyone. It's what they do. They wonder about me more. She looked at the hardware store door. Why? He did know why. All the reasons in order, without having to think about them. He said, Does it bother you? He thought about how to answer that. The real answer was complicated. The real answer was complicated in a way he wasn't sure he had the language for, and he was a man who already didn't have much language for complicated things. He settled for accurate. "What bothers me," he said, "is that you have to absorb it." She looked at him. The flat white light made her face very clear, every angle of it, every place where exhaustion had settled, and where something else, something newer, hadn't quite displaced it yet. "That's a careful answer," she said. "It's the true one." She nodded slowly. Then she started walking toward the truck, the crutch finding the uneven sidewalk with its usual precision, and Cole walked beside her, not ahead, not behind, and the town went about its Saturday around them without asking their permission. The thing that broke it open came from a direction Cole hadn't covered, counted for many variables. He'd thought about Mara's anger, some slow architecture of whatever was being rebuilt in its place. Thought he'd intervened. He'd thought about Sophie's attachment and what it would cost her eventually left, which Mara would eventually do, the interview in Pittsburgh being the visible shape of a future that was already forming. He'd thought about his own, whatever it was, the 22 days his brain had been counting without being asked. He had not thought about Rick Soland. Rick Soland was 44, divorced, the manager of the Clearfield County logging division of a company called Vantage Timber, and he drove a company truck he wasn't supposed to use for personal errands. Cole knew him at the periphery the way you know people in a rural county, by reputation and encounter, and the things Walt mentioned at the fence line. He knew Rick as a man who managed people the way some men managed livestock, through pressure and the implicit threat of consequences, rather than through any principle that would hold up to examination. He also knew, because this was a small county and information traveled the way water traveled in terrain like this. No, finding every channel that Rick Soland had managed the Clearfield County logging operation 14 years ago, when it was under a different corp name and a different banner, but the same essential structure. Cole knew this. He hadn't told Mara. He'd been sitting on it for 11 days. Since the night he'd done the math, Mara's father, Carpenter County mechanic, logging company connection, timeline, and come up with a number he didn't like. He'd been sitting on it because he wasn't sure what he had. He wasn't sure it was what he thought it was, and he wasn't sure, experienced enough in environments where partial information caused more damage than no information to know that you confirmed before you acted. He'd been confirming. Walt had given him the first piece over the fence on a Tuesday. In the offhand way, Walt gave information as a digression from something else, almost as an aside, the information so normalized in his understanding of local history that he didn't register it as a disclosure. Soland was Vantage even back then, Walt had said, talking about something else entirely, a land dispute, something about an access road. Back when it was called Ridge Operations, he was a site manager, maybe 30, already had the mouth. Cole had said nothing. He'd filed it, pulled the rest from county records, which were technically public and practically inaccessible, unless you knew what you were looking for and spent a Sunday afternoon at the county clerk's office with a specific name and a specific year. He'd done this while Mara was at the kitchen table drawing, and Sophie was at a friend's house, and Ranger was asleep in a patch of afternoon sun. What he found was this: Daniel Vance had been dismissed from a logging camp supply contract, not directly employed by Vantage, but contracted through a supply and equipment maintenance company that serviced their sites. The dismissal paperwork cited absenteeism. The paperwork was signed by the site manager, 1R, Soland. Cole had also found through a chain of contacts that involved 2 phone calls he didn't detail to anyone, that Daniel Vance had filed a safety complaint through the contractor system 14 months before his dismissal about improperly maintained cutting equipment on a site that R. Soland managed. The complaint had been formally received and had produced no documented response. He sat on all of this for 11 days. He stopped sitting on it on the Saturday evening after the hardware store. Mara was on the porch when he came out. She'd been there for an hour with the sketchbook, the new one Sophie had bought with her own allowance money, which Sophie had presented with the particular casualness of a child, trying not to make a big thing of something that was a big thing. The evening had gone cold but clear, the sky above the ridge the deep blue of early dark, and Mara's crutch was leaning against the porch rail, and Ranger was beside her chair. Cole sat on the porch steps, not in a chair, On the steps, elbows on his knees, which was the position he occupied when he was about to say something he'd been organizing for a while. Mara noticed the posture. She put the sketchbook down. "What?" she said. Not a question. He told her what he'd found. All of it. In the order he'd found it, with the sourcing, Walt's information, the county records, the contacts. He didn't editorialize. He didn't interpret. He laid it out the way he'd been trained to lay out intelligence, what he had, where it came from, what it could and couldn't support. When he finished, the porch was very quiet. Mara was looking at the ridge. Her jaw was set in the specific way it set when she was processing something through. The part of her that processed rather than reacted, which he knew now was her default. She processed first always, and then she reacted. The reaction was always more controlled than what she was actually feeling. "You've known this for 11 days, she said. "I was confirming before I left." 11 days. Yes. She looked at him, and this was different from the look in the kitchen after he'd told her about the belt. Different from the look in the workshop when she'd told him she wasn't forgiving him. This look had something in it he hadn't seen from her before, a cold quality, a flatness in his eyes that wasn't anger and wasn't grief and was something harder than either. "He complained about the equipment," she said. "A safety complaint formally submitted 14 months before he was fired, before the accident. The same equipment that the site where he died. I don't know that yet. I know it was a Vantage contracted site. That's the same company. Different sites, same management chain. Was quiet for a long time. The night had fully arrived, and the temperature had dropped another 4 degrees, and she was sitting in it without appearing to feel it, which was the physiological signature of a person running too hot on the inside to register cold on the outside. He knew the equipment was dangerous, she said. He told someone, officially, and they fired him for not showing up to a job on a day when he was saving your life. That's what the record suggests. "Don't do that," she said sharply. "What?" "The operational language. What the record suggests. Say it plainly." Cole held her gaze. They used his absence as the excuse because he'd made them uncomfortable and they wanted him gone. The safety complaint gave them the motivation. The rescue gave them the opportunity. Mara stood up. The sketchbook slid off her lap and fell to the porch boards, and she didn't pick it up. She walked to the porch rail and put her hand on it and stood with her back to Cole, and the line of her shoulders was doing the high-pressure thing he'd seen once before. In the kitchen at 11 o'clock on the first night, when she'd been standing at the back door with her bag packed. "He kept going for you," she said. Her voice was very low. "He left the job, he went down that embankment, he stayed for 2 hours in the cold, and the whole time his name was already on a list, because he'd tried to make the place safer." She turned around. "He kept going for you. Why didn't anyone keep going for him?" Cole didn't answer. There was no answer that was adequate, and he knew it. And she knew he knew it. "Solent is still here," he said. "He's still managing for Vantage." Something moved in her face. "Where?" she said. "Mara, where is he?" That stopped, reoriented. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." "Then we don't go find him yet." She looked at him with the flat, cold look. "This isn't your problem to manage. Whose problem it is?" "Then stop." "I'm not managing it," he said. "I'm telling you that walking up to Rick Solon's door tonight, when you're running this hot, is the kind of move that doesn't help you and doesn't help your father's memory and doesn't accomplish one single thing except give him a story to tell about the woman who showed up and lost her composure." The porch was very still. Mara's jaw worked. Her hand on the rail went white at the knuckle. "You don't get to tell me how to feel about this," she said. "I'm telling you what I know about tactical timing." His voice was flat and even. "Feel whatever you want. Act when it helps." She stared at him. He stared back. The standoff lasted 8 seconds, he counted. Couldn't help it. And then something shifted in her eyes. Not a surrender, more like a recalibration. The flatness didn't leave, but it reorganized around something deliberate, rather than something purely reactive. "You found all of this," she said. "Yes, for me. I found it, because I should have looked 14 years ago. Finding it now is the minimum." She bent down and picked up the sketchbook from the porch boards. She held it in her right hand and looked at it for a moment, not at the drawing but at the cover, the plain cream cover Sophie had chosen, because she'd said Mara's drawings needed room to be themselves. "What else is there to find?" she asked. "I don't know yet. Someone who might. He paused. A former site worker. He was on the Clearfield County crew in that period. He's in Backerton now. He returned my call this morning. Did you talk to him? I wanted to tell you first. She looked up. The flat look had shifted again. There was something in it, now that he found harder to read. Warmth exactly. Note, gratitude. Something more complicated. The expression of a person recalibrating the map they had of you. I'm going with you, she said. I know. When? Monday, if you want. He's available Monday. She nodded. Looked at the ridge again, the dark line of it against the darker sky. What's his name? Earl Price. He worked supply chain for the contractor. He was there when the safety complaint was filed. Cole paused. He was also there the day Daniel was fired. The name settled on the porch between them. Mara absorbed it the way she absorbed things completely, without visible fracture, pulling it into the structure of what she was building in her mind, adding it to the load. Monday, she said. Monday. She went inside. He heard her in the kitchen, the kettle, the familiar sound of the cabinet where the mugs were kept. He stayed on the steps. The ridge was fully black now against a sky that was showing stars through the cloud breaks, the cold and clear smell of a night that had decided to be honest about what it was. Ranger pushed the porch door open with his nose and came out and sat beside Cole on the step, shoulder against his knee. Cole put his hand on the dog's head and they sat there in the dark, neither of them moving, while inside the farmhouse, the kettle built to its whistle and then was lifted before it could go off Mara's hand on it in the exact moment before the sound. He'd noticed she always did that, anticipated the sound before it happened. He wondered what it cost to live that alert. He wondered if she'd learned it from Daniel, the man who went calmly down icy embankments and talked about truck engines to keep a stranger conscious. Yes, he'd intervened. He wondered if Daniel had known that night on Route 9 that the world was already arranging the payment it intended to take from him. He'd intervened. He thought probably not. He thought Daniel Vance had gone down that embankment because a truck had gone off the road and there was a person in it, and there was nothing complicated about that. He thought about his own failures in the intervening years, the ones he'd cataloged and the ones he hadn't yet, and he thought about Monday, and Earl Price in Backerton, and the county records he'd copied, and the call records he'd copied, and the safety complaint, filed and never answered. You find the failure point. You reinforce it. Patch what should be replaced. Mara's voice in the workshop 3 weeks ago, quoting her father without knowing she was quoting him. The porch light above him flickered once and held. Cole sat in the cold and did not look away from the dark. Monday came in cold and clear, the kind of February morning that made no promises but at least stopped lying about the weather. Cole had the truck running by 7:30, the heat going, the ice scraped off the windshield with the methodical passes of a man who did not rush through preparation because he had learned in environments where preparation was survival that the 2 minutes you skipped at the beginning always cost. 10 minutes at the worst possible point later. Came out at 7:45 with her canvas bag and her coffee in a travel cup she'd found in the back of Cole's cabinet, a battered steel thermos with a dent on one side that had been there since before Sophie was born. She hadn't asked if she could use it. She'd just used it, which Cole found he had no problem with, which was its own piece of information about where things stood. She got into the passenger seat without assistance and without commentary, the crutch stowed in the back with the same efficient geometry she always used for tight spaces. Ranger was at the kitchen door watching them go, his large head tilted, which was his expression for mild concern about departures he hadn't been included in. Cole backed out of the drive. Neither of them spoke for the first 10 minutes. The road through the ridge was clear but not dry, a thin film of condensation that hadn't yet decided whether to freeze, and Cole drove it with his hands easy on the wheel, not gripping, the way experienced drivers in mountain terrain learn to do because gripping made you fight the road instead of read it. No. Backerton was 40 minutes east, down the eastern ridge and through 2 valleys. A smaller town than Ashford, less tourism, more extraction, the kind of place that had existed for 100 years by pulling things out of the ground, and had spent the last 30 years adjusting to the reality that there was less left to pull. Earl Price lived in a yellow house on a street that had 4 other yellow houses, as if the neighborhood had collectively agreed on a color and then run out of other decisions. He was 61, retired from the contractor system after a back injury, and he'd returned Cole's with him in 3 hours, which Cole took as a sign that he'd been waiting for a version of this call for a long time. He opened the door before they knocked. He was a lean man, the kind of lean that came from hard physical work over many decades, rather than intention. His hands were the hands of someone who had worked with them for 40 years, and would probably work with them until he couldn't. He had a gray beard that hadn't been trimmed recently, and eyes that moved quickly between Cole and Mara, the assessment of a man who had spent a career in environments where reading people fast was practical. He looked at Mara longer than he looked at Cole. "You're Daniel's girl," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice had the flat certainty of recognition, something beyond guessing. It was very still. "You knew him." "Come inside," Earl said. "I've got coffee." The living room was the room of a man who lived alone and had stopped caring about the impression it made, not dirty, just accumulated. Books on every flat surface, a recliner that had been the primary piece of furniture, for long enough that the other chairs looked decorative by comparison. Earl cleared 2 of them without apology, and they sat, the 3 of them, with coffee to constitute a structural element. "How'd you know," Mara asked, "that I was his?" Earl looked at her steadily. "You've got his eyes, especially. And you came here with someone who'd been asking questions about a dismissal from 2010. So," he shrugged. "You were on site," Cole said. "Supply chain coordinator, which means I was in the office when most things happened, and in the yard when the things that weren't supposed to happen happened." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "I was there when Dan filed the complaint. I was there when Soland got the paperwork. Was there the day Dan didn't show up and Soland used it." Mara leaned forward slightly. "Tell me exactly what happened." Earl looked at her. He had the expression of a man who has been holding something uncomfortable for a long time and has genuinely mixed feelings about putting it down, relief and guilt in roughly equal measure. The complaint was about the felling equipment on the Clearfield Site B, specifically the hydraulic tension sensors on the Delimber. Yes, he'd intervened. Dan had been doing maintenance rotation site equipment that was part of the contract his company held. He found sensor readings that were out of spec. Not slightly out. Significantly. Earl set his mug down. He documented it. Filed through the contractor system, which went to Soland as site manager. And Soland ignored it, Cole said. Soland did something worse than ignore it. Earl's jaw tightened. He called Dan's contracting company and told them their maintenance guy was causing friction. That's the word he used. Friction. He didn't address the complaint, he went around it and applied pressure to the people who paid Dan. Could he do that, Mara asked. Could he? Yes. And the contracting company's small outfit, 3 employees including Dan, they couldn't afford to lose the Vantage account. So they told Dan to keep his head down. He didn't keep his head down, Mara said. He sent a second notification, direct to the regional safety office, not through the contractor system. Earl picked up his mug again. One went into a pile somewhere, and I don't know if it ever came back out. But Soland found out he'd sent it. And after that, Earl paused. After that, Dan's name was on a list. Soland was looking for the moment. The accident gave it to him, Cole said. Your accident, Earl said. He looked at Cole without judgment, but without softening either. Dan got the call a truck off Route 9. Someone trapped. He was 30 yards from the site entrance when he turned around. Because I saw him. I was in the yard. He saw me see him, and he pointed toward the road and just... Earl moved his hand in the gesture of someone indicating a direction and a decision simultaneously. Mara's right hand was flat on her knee. Moving. He was gone 6 hours, Earl said. Site work had started without him. Soland had it on the log by 2 o'clock, unauthorized absence, work abandonment. By the time Dan got back, the paperwork was already drafted. He explained, Mara said. It wasn't a question, he explained. Soland said the nature of the absence didn't change the contractual obligation. He said it was the third incident, which was true. Technically, if you counted 2 previous latenesses, that everyone who worked there knew were traffic issues on the mountain road that everyone dealt with. Earl's voice had gone flat, with the particular flatness of a man recounting something he'd witnessed and hadn't been able to stop. Dan's company lost the account the following month. Soland's official reason was performance concerns. The real reason was that Dan had filed complaints about equipment that Solend had signed off as operational. The same equipment, Mara said slowly. Equipment in that family, yes. Different site. 2 years later. Earl looked at her directly. The accident that killed your father, I'm not saying the sensor issue was directly connected. I'm saying the culture Solend maintained, where you didn't question the sign-offs, where you kept your head down, where complaints disappeared, that culture didn't end when Dan left. It just kept going without the one person who'd been willing to say something. The room was very quiet. Cole was watching Mara. Her face had done the thing it did under high pressure. The stillness, the controlled surface, but her eyes were doing something different. Something he'd learned to read as the internal process of a person reordering a fundamental understanding of their own history. He was right, she said. About the equipment. He was right, Earl said. And they fired him for being right. They fired him for being absent. The reason they wanted him absent was that he was right. Earl's voice was tired. From the conversation, from the 14 years he'd carried this. I should have said something at the time. I knew what was happening. I had a family and a mortgage, and Vantage had 3 more contracts our company was hoping to pick up. He looked at his hands. I made the calculation. I'm not proud of it. Why are you telling us now? Cole asked. Earl looked up. Because you called, and because I've been waiting for someone to call for a long time. He paused. Because I saw Dan's face when he came back that day, after the rescue. He was exhausted and half frozen, and Solend was standing in the yard with the dismissal papers, and Dan looked at him, and Earl stopped, took a breath. He didn't argue. He just looked at Solend. The way you look at something you've already decided is not worth your further engagement. Signed the acknowledgement, took his copy, and left. He looked at Mara. He didn't look beaten. I want you to know that. He looked like he'd already made his peace with it, Mara said quietly. Nodded. That's it exactly. They sat with that for a while. Outside, a car passed on the yellow street. Inside, the coffee cooled, and none of them moved to refresh it, and that was fine. There's one more thing, Earl said. Cole looked at him. About a month before the accident, his accident, on the construction site, Dan called me. We'd kept in touch loosely. He called to tell me he'd found out the man he rescued had survived. Earl looked at Mara. He'd gotten word through someone at the county hospital. I think someone who knew someone. But he knew. He paused. He asked me if I thought it was worth trying to reach out, to see how the man was doing. Mara looked at Earl, then at Cole, then back at Earl. What did you tell him? She asked. I told him it might open something complicated, that the man might feel obligated or guilty, and that Daniel didn't need that on top of everything else. Earl's jaw worked. I told him to let it rest. Cole said nothing. His hands were around his mug, and he was looking at the table between them. No. And the expression on his face was the expression of a man absorbing a piece of information that reorders everything he thought he understood about what he was responsible for. He listened to you, Cole said. He did that time. Earl looked at both of them. He wouldn't have, I think, if things had been different, if he'd had more time. He paused. He told me this was in the same call, he said. If I found that wreck again, I'd stop again. He wasn't bitter about what it cost him. Earl shook his head. He thought it was a reasonable trade, a life for a livelihood. He thought that math worked. Mara's eyes were full, not spilling, held by the same extraordinary control that governed everything else she did. Cole watched her do it, hold it, and he thought about what it cost to keep holding things that deserved to be put down. He never regretted it, she said. No, Earl said. Once, not that I ever saw. The room was quiet again, a different quality of quiet than before. Not the quiet of things unspoken, but the quiet of things that have finally been said and are now taking up the space they were always supposed to occupy. They were 20 minutes out of Bakerton, on the return drive, when Mara spoke. Pull over, she said. Cole pulled over. A gravel shoulder on a 2-lane state road, the ridge visible ahead, nothing behind them. He put it in park and left the engine running for the heat. Was looking straight ahead through the windshield. The winter landscape outside was brown and gray and intermittently white, the bare trees doing the thing bare trees do in February, looking like they're finished, when actually they're building the whole next season underground, in the dark, where it doesn't show. He didn't regret it, she said. No. All this time I've been... She stopped. Her right hand came up and pressed against her sternum, not dramatically, just placed there, the way you press against something that's been tight for a long time and you're testing whether the pressure helps. I've been angry at the thing that took him from me. I needed it to be a mistake. I needed him to have been taken. By something that shouldn't have happened. By something that shouldn't have happened. He was taken by something that shouldn't have happened, Cole said. But the part I the rescue. You. She looked at her hand on her chest, then lowered it. I made the rescue the thing. I made stopping for you the mistake that started everything. He didn't think it was a mistake. She turned and looked at Cole. He never thought it was a mistake. So my anger has been aimed at something my father didn't believe was wrong. Cole held her gaze. The anger has somewhere to go, he said. Solent. The culture he ran. The complaint that went nowhere. That's real. That's where it belongs. I know. She looked out the windshield again. That now. A pause. But it's different. It's the anger at you was personal. It had a face. She spread her hand against the dashboard. This is institutional. It's diffuse. It's harder to hold. Harder to hold and easier to act on, Cole said. Because it's documentable. Earl will talk. The records exist. If you want to do something with it. I don't know what I want to do with it yet. Okay. I need to think. Okay. She looked at him. You're very good at not pushing. I'm very bad at not pushing, he said. I'm just making a specific effort right now. Something in her face moved. Not a smile. Something preceding a smile, the infrastructure of one, she said. He pulled back onto the road. The ridge came closer as they drove, the familiar shape of it against the sky, and Cole navigated the switchbacks by memory. The road becoming more specific and more known with every mile. At some point somewhere between the second switchback and long flat that preceded the turn onto the farm road, Mara's hand moved from her lap to the edge of the console between them, reaching, just relocated. The way you move closer to a heat source without deciding to. Cole drove. Sophie was home from school when they got back, which meant it was already after 3, which meant the drive and Earl Price's yellow house and everything that had been said in it had taken longer than Cole had tracked. She was at the kitchen table with homework when they came in, Ranger at her feet, and she looked up with the particular attention of a child who has been waiting, without admitting she was waiting. She looked at Mara's face first. Kids do this go to the most informative face in the room, the one least practiced at concealment. Mara's face was not unreadable, but it was different. The particular difference of someone who has been through something that has moved things around internally. Sophie read it the way she read most things fast, accurately with a brief pause, while she decided how to respond. There's soup, she said. I made the kind with the barley. I remembered you said that was your dad's favorite. Mara stopped. She looked at Sophie, who was already looking back at her homework with the exaggerated focus of a child who has done something deliberate and doesn't want to make a production of it. Sophie, Mara said. It's the yellow box. I followed the instructions. It's probably fine. Thank you. Sophie shrugged without looking up. It's soup. Cole hung his jacket and washed his hands at the kitchen sink, and Mara sat at the table across from Sophie, and outside the window the afternoon had gone the amber color it went at this hour. In February, the light coming in low and warm across the kitchen floor, in a way that made the room look like a photograph of itself. They ate soup. It was good soup. Sophie had added too much barley, which made it thick and dense, and exactly the way you want soup to be when it's February, and you've spent the day in the cold learning hard things. Body talked about Earl Price, or the Yellow House, or Rick Soland. Sophie told them about a geography project involving a topographic map she had to make out of salt dough, and Mara asked 3 questions about the technique that turned out to be better questions than Sophie had thought to ask her teacher. And by the end of dinner, they were making a list of what the salt dough needed to be stable enough to hold the ridge contours. Cole washed the dishes. He listened to the 2 of them at the table, the way their voices layered. Mara's lower register, and Sophie's still-pitched, high 10-year-old voice going back and forth about salt ratios and drying times, and the specific problem of representing a cliff face in 3 dimensions, and he felt the particular weight of a moment he knew he was going to remember. He dried his hands and turned around. They were both bent over Sophie's notebook, Mara sketching a quick diagram of a topographic technique with her right hand, Sophie watching, with her chin on her hands. He went to the living room and sat in the chair by the window and picked up the book he'd been reading for 3 weeks without making much progress. He read 4 pages, heard them still talking in the kitchen. Read 3 more. He found Mara in the workshop at 10 o'clock that night, working, sitting on the stool at the bench with the new sketchbook open, but the pencil down, and she was looking at the belt where it sat on the far shelf, still wrapped in its oilcloth, in the box Cole had carried back from the shelf, and then not put away again after that first night in the workshop. He came in and didn't speak. He went to her bench and sat on the stool he used when he was running the lathe, and they both looked at the box. "I want to go to Carpenter County," she said. "Okay. My father's workshop is still there. The house was sold, but the workshop, my mother kept it. She died 2 years ago, and the property went to. It's complicated. There's a cousin, but the workshop is still standing." She looked at the oilcloth. "I haven't been back." "Since when?" "Since we left. When I was 12. My mother and I moved to Harrisburg." She paused. "I've been avoiding it. Why?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because I thought going back would mean having to be 11 again. Having to stand in the place where his tools are and feel everything I felt then without the context." She looked at Cole. "I think I have more context now." "Earl helped," Cole said. "Earl helped." She turned the sketchbook over in her hand, looking at the back of it, the plain cream back. "He didn't regret it, my father. That's—" She stopped, breathed. "That's the thing I've been missing. I've been carrying his death as a mistake. It wasn't a mistake to him. It was just what happened next, after he did what he believed in." "That doesn't make the loss smaller," Cole said. "No, but it changes what I'm grieving." She set the sketchbook on the bench. "I've been grieving a mistake. Now I'm grieving a man who made a choice that cost him everything and didn't think the cost was too high." She looked at the box again. "That's harder. And also," she paused.
"Also easier, somehow."
"Because it's him. It's actually him, instead of what I made of him." Cole looked at the box on the shelf. The oilcloth, the shape of what was inside it. "When do you want to go?" he asked. "Soon. Before the interview. Before Pittsburgh and all of that." She looked at her hands. "I need to go back first." "I'll drive you, Cole," he said. "I know it's not my grief and not my reconciliation and not my place to—" "That's not what I was going to say." He looked at her. "I was going to say—" She paused. "Yet." The pencil was still on the bench and she picked it up, turned it in her fingers, set it down again. The specific fidget of a person who is not usually a fidgeter and is currently using their hands to manage something. Their mouth isn't quite ready to manage. "I was going to say that I want you to come. That I think I need someone there who knew what the belt means. Who has been carrying his name for 14 years. She looked at him directly. "You're the only other person alive who was with him. That night." Cole held the look, held it without looking away, without filling the silence with something smaller than what she'd said. "All right," he said. "All right, Sophie can stay with Walt. He owes me." "Walt, who thinks I'm suspicious." "Walt, who has been corrected on the subject," Cole said. Something moved in her face. "You corrected him." "Twice. The workshop was warm enough. He's slow." The space heater Cole had turned on when they came in, having done its work, and the smell of the place, oil and old wood and the leather they'd been working on, was the smell of the last several weeks, which had accumulated into something Mara no longer processed consciously because it had become part of her environment rather than a feature of it. She picked up the pencil again. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "The night in the truck. Coming here from the lodge. You didn't know anything then. You didn't know who I was, what my father's name was, any of it." She looked at the pencil. "Why did you pull the chair out?" Cole thought about it. The real answer, not the simplified one. "Because you'd asked 11 people, and 11 people had said no," he said. "I know what it costs to ask. So I knew what 11 no's cost." He paused. "And because you didn't look beaten, you just looked undeterred." Yes, he'd intervened, and I've been around enough people who were beaten and people who were undeterred to know the difference is worth paying attention to. She was quiet for a moment. "That's a very tactical reason to offer someone a chair," she said. "A very tactical person. And the other reason?" He looked at her. The chair was empty. "You needed to sit down. Sometimes that's enough." She held his gaze for a long moment. Yet then she opened the sketchbook, pink pencil, and started drawing, and satte the pencil close the spot on the stool across from her because there was nowhere else he was supposed to be, and they both understood that without saying it. She drew for 40 minutes without speaking. When she finally turned the sketchbook around and showed him, it was the workshop not photographically, not literally, but the shape of it. The two stools and the workbench and the shelf, the box with the box on it, and the quality of the light from the single overhead bulb. And in the drawing, the space felt the way it actually felt when you were in it, which was not often the thing drawings managed to capture. He looked at it. "That's the empty chairs series?" he asked. She said. She looked at the drawing herself for a moment. "That's something new." She turned it back and looked at it one more time, and then she closed the sketchbook over it. Outside, the wind came across the ridge and moved through the bare birch trees along the fence line in the long, sighing pull it made at this hour, and inside the workshop the heater ticked and the light burned steadily overhead. Cole stayed until she went in. He turned off the light and walked back to the house across the gravel in the dark, and above the ridge the stars were out in the full February way, cold and clear and indifferent and numerous, and he walked under them without looking up, and went inside. They left for Carpenter County on a Thursday, 3 days after Backerton. Sophie went to Waltz with her backpack and her salt dough project in a cardboard box, and the particular dignity of a 10-year-old who understood she was being excluded from something important and had decided to be gracious about it. She hugged Mara at the door, not the brief side hug of social obligation, but a real one, the kind that takes a moment to complete, and then told Cole to drive carefully on the mountain roads like she was the one who'd been driving them for 4 years. "The roads," Cole said. "You drive too fast on the lower switchback," she said. "I drive exactly fast enough." That's what people say before they go off the road. Made a sound that was definitively a laugh, which she covered imperfectly with her hand. Cole pointed at her. She stopped laughing. Sophie looked satisfied. Walt appeared in his doorway, the yellow house with the porch float light on even at 9 in the morning, was Walt's way, and waved them off with the magnanimous gesture of a man who had been corrected twice about Mara, and had arrived at something resembling a position of neutrality that was, for Walt, practically a warm welcome. Cole drove. The route to Carpenter County took them south and then east, off the ridge and down into the valley, through 2 towns that were mostly gas stations, and one that had a diner Cole knew from years back. They stopped there for coffee, sat at the counter, ate eggs that came out wrong but not badly wrong, and left a tip that was too large, because that was too large was clearly having a shift going to end with him in a bad mood, and Cole had been that person enough times to feel it from across the room. Mara didn't comment on the tip. She just picked up her coffee cup and her crutch and went back to the truck and was already buckled when he got there. "It's everything," she said. "Most things," he said. "Everything. What do you miss?" He thought about it seriously, which was the only way he thought about direct questions. Things that are happening inside people that they're good at hiding. She looked at him. "You noticed me in that lodge. I noticed what was being done to you in that lodge. That's different." She turned to the window. The valley road was straight and flat here, the mountains visible on 3 sides, the sky doing the thing it did in early March, uncertain, promising, not quite committed to spring, but no longer able to maintain winter with any conviction. "He's good at hiding things," she said. Solent, yes. Earl said he's still managing. Same territory. Yes. That bothers me. I know. She was quiet for a moment. The road moved under them. "I'm going to do something about it. Today. But I'm going to do something." "Okay. I mean it. The safety complaint, the records, Earl's testimony, there's enough there for a formal complaint to the State Occupational Board. Maybe more." She looked at her hand on her knee. "I talked to someone, a labor attorney, on the phone 2 nights ago." Cole looked at her. 2 nights ago. While you were in the workshop. You didn't say anything. I was still deciding." She turned from the window and met his eyes. "He took a case. Pro bono review for now. He thinks the documentation combined with Earl's account and the accident records from the Clearfield site is enough to open an investigation." She paused. "It won't bring my father back. It won't undo what Solon did. But if there are other men out there filing complaints that are going into the same pile, if there are other sites running the same way, then it matters going forward," Cole said. "Yes." He drove. She watched the road. The mountains kept their distance on the horizon. The particular mountain patience of things that have decided they will be there when you arrive, regardless of when you leave. Your father filed a complaint no one acted on, Cole said. You're filing one, they'll have to. Mara looked at him. He started it, Cole said. You're finishing it. Was very still for a long moment. Then she turned back to the window, and he saw her shoulders drop, not in defeat, the opposite. The drop of someone who has been carrying something at shoulder height for a long time and has finally found a surface level, enough to set it on. Carpenter County appeared at the end of a valley road that wound through what used to be apple orchard country and was now mostly second-growth timber and fields that hadn't been cultivated in 15 years. The town itself was smaller than Ashford 1 Main Street, a hardware store, a library, 2 churches, a diner that looked like it hadn't changed its sign since the 80s. The house where Mara had grown up was on the eastern edge of town, set back from the road on half an acre. The house itself had changed new owners, new paint, a swing set in the yard that Daniel Vance would never have installed because he'd believed in building things rather than buying them and would have made one from timber. The mailbox had a different name. Mara looked at it from the truck window as they drove past. Stop, she said. He didn't stop. The workshop was separate from the house, which had been the saving thing it sat on a different parcel, a rectangular building behind what used to be the property fence, accessible from the side street. Cousin who'd inherited the property line had done nothing with it. The door was padlocked, with a combination lock that Mara's mother had set, and Mara had gotten from a letter her mother left with the deed documents. She'd kept it in her canvas bag for 2 years without opening it. Parked on the side street. They sat for a moment. The workshop looked exactly like what it was, a building that had been built by a man who was good at building things, that had been empty for over a decade, that had held up better than it had any obligation to because it had been built to hold up. The roof was intact. The siding needed paint. The small window on the south face was intact but dirty, the glass opaque with dust and the mineral residue of years of weather. "'Kay," Mara said. To herself, not to Cole, she got out. He got out and followed, carrying nothing except the box with the belt in it, which he'd brought from the workshop shelf the night before without telling her, and had put in the truck's back seat. He hadn't told her it was there. He wasn't sure why. He'd just known it needed to make the trip. Mara worked the combination on the lock with her right hand, the crutch steadied against the door frame. The lock gave on the second try. She pulled it free. She put her hand on the door. She didn't open it for a moment. Cole stood behind her and to the left, far enough to give her the space, close enough that she knew without looking that he was there. She opened the door. The smell was the first thing. Bad, old, and specific, the way places smell when they've been closed for years, but were clean when they were closed. Sawdust. Old leather. Beneath all of it, something she recognized from a cellular level, a memory encoded somewhere below language. And she stood in the doorway, and her body recognized it before her mind did. She went in. Cole stayed at the threshold. The workshop was as Daniel had left it, which meant it was more organized than any space that had been idle for 12 years had a right to be. Tools on pegboards, outlines traced in pencil behind each one, so the gaps were visible a mechanic's habit, the professional compulsion to know at a glance what was missing. Workbench along the south wall, the surface worn smooth in the places he'd used it most. The leather working station in the corner, the same needle, or one identical to it, in a small clay pot besides a coil of wax thread that had dried and become unusable but was still there. A rolling stool on casters, pushed partway under the bench. Mara walked to the bench. She put her right hand flat on the surface, on the worn area, the place shaped by years of his hands. She stood there. Cole stayed at the door. He didn't speak. He held the box and watched her and gave her everything she needed, which was the space and the silence to be in this room with her father's tools and her father's absence and every year that had passed since the last time she'd stood in this place when he was still alive. She was there for a long time. When she turned around, her eyes were wet and she wasn't hiding it, performing it, just not hiding it. He kept his tools better than anything else in his life, she said. Her voice was steady enough. The truck was always a mess. The house was comfortable chaos, my mother's phrase. In here, she looked at the pegboard. every tool where it belonged. He knew what mattered, Cole said. He knew where things worked. She looked at the rolling stool. Used to sit on that and spin around while he worked. He never told me to stop. She looked at the corner, at the leather station. I learned to sew leather here, on that bench, because he let me try things. She moved to the bench and touched the edge of the clay pot. I've been doing it for 14 years like it was just a skill I had. It never occurred to me until you asked about it that I learned it from him. Cole came in fully. He set the box on the bench beside her. She looked at it. Then at him he opened it, unwrapped the oilcloth, put the belt on the workbench on the worn surface in the light from the dirty south window that came through amber and thick with suspended dust. They both looked at it. The three marks, the one crooked hole, the scorched edge. Mara picked it up. She held it the way you hold something that has been a long time returning, not carefully, not like it was fragile, but with a completeness of grip, a hand that knew the weight of what it was holding. Ket key. She carried it to the leather station in the corner and set it down there, on the surface he'd worked on, in the place where he'd made it. She stepped back. He should have his things back, she said. Cole nodded. She looked at the tool wall, at the rolling stool, at the bench, at the small, dirty window that let in the March light. I'm going to restore this, she said. He looked at her, immediately. But I'm going to. The cousin doesn't want it, I already asked. He's willing to transfer the parcel. She turned to Cole. I don't know what I'd use it for. Maybe nothing practical. Maybe just... She looked around the space. Maybe it just needs to be the way he left it. Working again. Not closed. You could use it for the illustration work, Cole said. You'll need space for the residency projects. Pittsburgh is 2 hours from here. She looked at him. He looked back. The thing between them that had been building for 7 weeks was fully visible in that look, on both sides. Neither of them pretending it wasn't there. What are you saying? She asked. I'm saying you'll need a studio space. This is one, he paused. I'm saying the farm is 40 minutes from here. I'm saying Sophie asks about you every morning before she asks about anything else. Another pause. I'm saying I've been counting days since January, and I don't know how to stop. The workshop was very quiet. Outside, somewhere down the side street, a car started and drove away, and the sound faded, and the quiet resumed. So, she said. I'm not asking you to stay, he said. I'm asking you to know that there's something to come back to. After Pittsburgh, whatever Pittsburgh becomes. He was not a man who made speeches, and this was not a speech, it was information, delivered straight the way he delivered everything. You can say no. You can say it's too complicated, which it is. You can say, I'm not going to say no, she said. He stopped. I'm going to say it's too early, she said, and that I need the interview first, and I need to know what I'm building before I know where I want to build it. She looked at the belt on the leather station. But I'm not going to say no. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. They stood in Daniel Vance's workshop in the March light for a while longer, not doing anything with the moment except being in it, which was enough. The Westmore Arts Foundation interview happened on a Tuesday. Cole drove. Mara wore the same dark green jacket she'd been wearing the night she walked into Pine Hollow Lodge, which she'd washed and pressed but hadn't replaced, because she'd decided somewhere along the way that it was her jacket and it had done its job, and she wasn't interested in dressing for other people's impressions. She had her portfolio in a flat case that Sophie had found at a consignment shop in Ashford and spray-painted black in the barn on a Sunday afternoon, leaving green fingerprints on the workbench that Cole found 3 days later and said nothing about. The foundation was in a converted brick building in Pittsburgh's East Side, the kind of building that had been a factory 100 years ago and was now making a different kind of thing. The coordinator who met them in the lobby was a woman in her 40s who looked at the portfolio case and at Mara and said, "We loved the Empty Chairs series." The committee talked about it for 20 minutes. Mara said, "Good 20 minutes or complicated 20 minutes?" The coordinator smiled. "Both, the good kind of both." Cole waited in the lobby. He sat in a chair with his jacket over his arm and his phone face down on his knee, and he watched the lobby's foot traffic for 90 minutes in the automatic way of a man whose brain doesn't know how to stop assessing environments. And he thought about nothing in particular, which was the closest he got to peace. When Mara came back through the interior door, he read her face before she spoke. "They offered me a place," she said. "I know. You can't know, you were in the lobby. I can see your face. She stood in front of him with her portfolio case and her green jacket and her aluminum crutch, with the red grip Sophie had made her buy, and her face was doing the thing it almost never did open, fully, without any architecture of control over the top of it, just the raw expression of a person who's been whizzing towards something for a very long time and has finally arrived. It starts in September, she said. Full residency. Studio space included. Small September, he said. That's 6 months, I know. A lot can happen in 6 months. He said. It can. She looked at him for a moment. Then she held out her hand, not for a handshake, just extended, palm up, the way you extend a hand to someone you want to walk beside. He took it. They walked out of the converted brick building into the Pittsburgh March, which was cold and slightly damp and smelled like a city deciding to become something different than what it had been. And they walked to the truck with her hand in his, and neither of them commented on it because it didn't need commentary. The Solon matter resolved the way institutional matters resolve slowly, then suddenly in ways that don't look like resolution from the outside because they happen on paper and in offices and produce no dramatic scene. The State Occupational Safety Board opened a formal investigation in April. 6 weeks after Mara's attorney submitted the combined documentation, the 2010 safety complaint, Earl Price's sworn account, the cross-referenced accident records from the Clearfield site, and 3 additional former site workers Earl had located who had their own documentation of the same pattern across different years. Cole had helped Earl locate 2 of the 3. He didn't tell Mara about that part. She found out anyway, through Earl, and she didn't say anything about it to Cole directly. She just left a cup of coffee at his place at the kitchen table one morning before he was up, which was his habit, not hers, and she'd done it for him. He said nothing. The investigation took 4 months. Rick Solon's division was suspended from new contracting during the review period. 2 active sites were temporarily halted for equipment inspection. The final report documented a systemic pattern of safety complaint suppression spanning 9 years across 4 county operations. Solon was removed from his management position in July. The contracting company faced significant fines. The regional safety officer, who had received Daniel's second complaint and filed it without response, resigned, before the board could make a formal finding against the office. None of this made the front page of anything. It was bureaucratic and procedural, and it happened in meeting rooms and produced paper. Read the final report summary on her phone, sitting on the porch of the farmhouse on a July evening while Ranger slept at her feet, and Sophie was inside working on a drawing that Mara had been helping her with an illustration project she'd started for school and then continued after school ended because she found she didn't want to stop. Cole came out with 2 glasses of iced tea and sat on the steps. It's done, Mara said. I know. Earl called. They got him out. Yes. She set the phone down on the rail, looked at the ridge, which was fully green now, deeply green, the mountain summer at its most committed. It doesn't feel like I thought it would. What did you think it would feel like? More. She picked up the tea. But it's not nothing. Someone files a complaint about dangerous equipment in Clearfield County. Now it goes to a board that knows there's a pattern. No. Someone looks at it. She looked at the ridge. My father's complaint is part of the public record now. His name is in it. She was quiet for a moment. He complained about unsafe equipment in 2010 and nobody listened. 14 years later, the record says he was right. He was right, Cole said. He was right. She looked at her glass. That's not nothing, Cole said. It's not. The evenings settled around them, the ridge doing the ridge things it did in July, the light going long and amber, the birch trees along the fence moving in the small breeze that came up from the valley. At this hour, Ranger breathing slowly and evenly in the heat. I leave in 8 weeks, Mara said. I know, that's not enough time. He said, it's not. She looked at him. He looked back. 8 weeks, and a residency in Pittsburgh, and a studio space that was both here and there, and a workshop in Carpenter County, with her father's tools on the walls, and a belt on the leather station that belonged exactly where it was, and a farm on the ridge, with a spare room that had sketchbooks on the nightstand, and an old dog who had moved his water bowl without anyone's permission. None of it was clean. None of it fit into any category of easy. I'll come back, she said. I know. You don't know. I haven't promised. You just said you'd come back. That's not a promise. That's Mara. What? I know, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her tea and turned back to the ridge, and he did the same. And they sat on the porch in the July evening together, without needing to say anything else. She came back to Pine Hollow Lodge 3 days before she left for Pittsburgh. She didn't tell Cole why, just asked to stop on the way back from Carpenter County, where she'd spent 2 days in her father's workshop with a set of cleaning supplies and new shelving brackets and a can of wood oil for the workbench surface, returning the space to something that could be used. He hung the tools on the pegboard in the exact positions the line indicated, following the penciled traces her father had made so that anyone could see, at a glance, what was missing. She'd put her own tools, the illustration ones, the pencils and charcoal, and the flat cases on the portion of the bench that was clear. 2 workspaces, 1 bench, his in the corner, hers along the wall. He'd intervened. She'd left the belt where it was. At Pine Hollow, the parking lot was half full a Thursday afternoon. Some through traffic, some people who'd been coming here long enough to be regulars. The great room smelled exactly the same. Wood smoke, pine, fried food, the accumulated years of the place. The fireplace was cold in August, but the structure of it was the same. The stone and the mantel and the ash. That was never quite entirely cleaned out. Cole held the door. Mara went in. The room had that Thursday afternoon quality, not busy, not empty. Donna was behind the counter. A few families, a couple of truckers, an older man reading a newspaper. At the back table, the same table, the one at the far end, a young woman was standing with a canvas bag over her shoulder, looking at the room with the expression of someone who had just realized that all the chairs near the door were occupied, and she wasn't sure what her options were. Cole and Mara stopped. Mara looked at the young woman. Then she looked at the back table, where 2 chairs sat empty. She crossed the room. The young woman watched her come, pulled out a chair from the same one or the one in the same position, and looked at the young woman. Sit down, she said. It's a long drive from wherever you came from. The young woman blinked, looked at the chair, looked at Mara. Thank you, she said, and sat. Mara sat across from her. Cole sat at the end, Ranger settling under the table with the familiar ease of an old dog in a known place. They ordered. Donna brought coffee and didn't ask questions, because she was Donna, and she'd seen enough come through this room to know that the asking wasn't always the point. The young woman's name was Petra. She was 23, passing through on her way to a job that might not work out, in a town she'd never been to. She'd been driving since 5 in the morning, and she'd missed lunch. Mara listened to all of it. She asked 2 questions. She ordered an extra bowl of soup and told the server to put it on her tab before Petra could clarify that she hadn't asked for it. Petra caught it. I'm not accepting charity, she said. Automatic, reflexive. Mara looked at her across the table. She said, I ordered extra soup. I can't finish it. You can eat it or I can throw it away. Petra held her gaze for a moment. Then she picked up her spoon. Under the table, Ranger had moved. His large gray muzzle was resting 4 inches from Petra's boot, not touching, just oriented. Sophie, who had come in from the truck and wedged herself into the chair beside Cole, watched this with the evaluative satisfaction of someone who understood what it meant. Cole looked at Mara across the table. She was refilling her coffee cup, not looking at him, but the corner of her mouth had moved in the minimal way it moved when something landed exactly right. He looked at the table, the 4 of them, and the old dog, and the empty 5th chair that nobody had pulled away, that sat at the edge of the circle they'd made without planning, open to whatever came next. He looked at that chair for a moment. Then he picked up his coffee and drank it, and the fire was cold in the fireplace, but the room was warm enough, and outside the last of the summer light was doing what it always did in this part of the mountains, going long and gold before it let go, holding on a few extra seconds past when the math said it should, as if even the light knew that some things were worth staying for. The empty chairs collection opened at a Pittsburgh gallery in the spring of the following year, 6 months into Mara's residency. 23 pieces, ink and charcoal and occasional color. People in rooms where someone else had been. Tables with 1 setting. Doorways, workshop corners. A leather belt on a workbench in a particular quality of winter light. An aluminum crutch leaning against a lodge porch rail. A rolling stool pushed partway under a bench. like someone had just gotten up and would be back in a moment. The piece that sold first was called Route 9, January. It showed the underside of a truck cab, a flashlight beam from outside, and two hands, one bracing, one steadying, visible through a shattered window. You couldn't see the faces. You didn't need to. The piece that sold last, deliberately held back until the end of the show's run, was called The Empty Chair. It was the back table at Pine Hollow Lodge, exactly rendered. The stone fireplace blurred in the background, and the particular quality of winter light through old glass, falling on a wooden chair that had been pulled out from the table, just slightly, in the unmistakable gesture of someone making room. The show's program note, written by Mara and edited by nobody, said this: "These are drawings of absence. But absence has a shape, and the shape of it tells you what was there. These chairs are empty. They are not abandoned." There is a difference, and it matters. And most people who have lost someone already know it, they just don't always have a word for it. My father knew it. He left room at every table he sat at, because he was told to, because that was who he was. This is for him, and for anyone who has ever pulled out a chair for someone the room had already decided to turn away. The things that matter most rarely announce themselves. They arrive in ordinary moments: a door held open, a chair pulled out, a question asked plainly instead of dressed up as something easier. A belt left behind on an embankment. A name carried 14 years without knowing where to put it down. A sketch made on the back of a child's homework because the sketchbook had run out of pages and the drawing needed to happen anyway. Most of the time, you don't know you're doing the thing that matters. You just do what's in front of you. You stop because someone needs you to stop. You pull the chair out because it's empty and someone needs to sit. And sometimes 14 years later, the thing finds its way back to you. And you find out that stopping was always the right answer, especially when no one was watching to tell you so.